and let you go. I'll let you get out of here. Killing it. Are we good?
We're good.
All right. Well, I don't know if any of you read the little personal handout, the little personal books. Sometimes I'll look at it to make sure I don't duplicate everything about what it says. Usually I don't have to worry about that too much. But it had a good start, and I want you to think about it for a moment. If you're completely honest with yourself, what are the things that stress you most in your life? The little personal guide talked about, it could be family relationships. You know, listen, being married is pretty tough. I know I stress Karen quite a bit. We all face those kind of things. Our children can stress us. There's all kinds of things. The in-laws can stress us, just the circumstances. It also talked about our health. You know, we can, just like with Rebecca, all of a sudden you wake up one day and something's not right. I mean, you think about the health issues that human beings face, that we as people face. That can stress us. Could be the health of someone we care about. Can put a lot of stress on us. It could be the stress of you just wanting things to be better, for something to be different. Or it could be you're stressed because you think the future looks bleak, that it just doesn't look like it's going to be good news for anybody. We'll put that in context of the lesson today in chapter 49 of Isaiah. The people of Israel, if you look at the time setting of when Isaiah is prophesying today, the Israelites are in captivity in Babylon. And here are these people of God that are in captivity in a foreign land with a very pagan country. The Babylonians were all into their idols and their idol worship. And they were committed, just as much as many Christians are even today, to their God. I talked about last week where they dress him up and wash him every day and those kind of things. So just imagine, they bought into that being a God. It was a big deal to them. It was a part of their life and their culture. But Israel was there. They were there because why? They lost their land. The Lord said, hey, I love you, but I have to discipline you. And you think about it, I think a lot of people think of the Old Testament as being the books of judgment and the New Testament being the books of grace. But actually, if you really read and understand the Old Testament, it's full of God's grace too. Because God told these people for over 400 years, look, if you go astray, here's what's going to happen. So think about if you've got a child that's a little bit raising children, they're a little bit rebellious, and how many times you said, now listen, if you do this is what's going to happen. And you just keep giving them grace, you're trying to work with them, and all of a sudden the hammer has to fall. And you say, okay, that's it. You know, you lose your rights, or whatever it is, you lose, where it comes. And that was sort of the way the Lord dealt with them. He kept giving them these times of mercy and forgiving them over and over. We've talked about over the years about that cycle where they would be punished, they'd repent, they'd be blessed, and then it would just sort of start all over again. But here they are in Babylon because of their disobedience. But in Isaiah, the prophecy there was intended to give them comfort. So think about your life, and the personal guide that you have talks about where do you go to find your comfort. Is it to talk to someone, to talk to your mom, or to talk to your spouse, or maybe sometimes talk to a very close friend, or maybe you just talk to yourself to try to give yourself some comfort. Or you go and just get in a quiet place. Maybe you pray. I mean, I think if you lay it all on the Lord, that gives you some comfort sometimes. That's the only place you can go to get it. You and I need these places that we can do what? Or people that can calm us down, that can give us some, a sigh, that we just sort of relax. And we sometimes it means we just have to have someone remind us that we can let it go. We can just let some things go. And for some of us, that's really hard to do. In the back, as far as the context of 49, the book of Isaiah talks in probably 8 or 9 chapters about the servant of the Lord. And the servant of the Lord is sort of like a noun, if you want to think of it. And sometimes It's speaking as if it's someone the Lord's called, like Isaiah. Sometimes it's speaking about the nation of Israel. And sometimes it's actually speaking about the coming Messiah. You just imagine living that long ago, and Isaiah's prophesying about this perfect representation of the Israelite that hasn't happened yet, and how they had to try to interpret that. But 49 particularly is about the Messiah. It also can be related to the time of the Israelites then, that there were servants being called by God. But ultimately, Isaiah in some way saw this vision of this perfect Israelite, and that would have been Jesus Christ, because he represented the kind of person God called Israel to be. Just think about in our lives, who's a perfect Christian in your life that you can think of that is just the epitome of what you think a person of faith would be. That's sort of the way you want to look at that's what we see today. As I said, they're living in captivity. One of the things that would be hard about that is they could say, you know what? I guess our God's not as big and strong as we thought. The culture of that time was that if two countries, two nations, or two different groups of people went into battle against each other, went to war, then the theology, so to speak, then was that while that's going on, their respective gods were also at war. And whichever God won meant that his army won. You get it? So the Israelites, one commentator said they could say, did our God lose his battle? Or was he so upset at us, he let us lose? He let the other God win so we could lose. You get it? And so the idea is, did God just give up on us? Does God care anymore? Listen, there are not many Christians that by the time you and I get through our life, we're like, okay, where is he? Is he listening to me? Does he hear? Does he really care about what my real problems are? And that's sort of what they faced. And Isaiah is going to speak to them to give them some hope, to let them know the Lord does not give up on them. It's important for them to also, I think what he was trying to say, listen, if you're a child of God, you just have to not give up hope. And you have to not lose sight of the fact that even though you're going through these things, the Lord has not forgotten you. He's not going to forget who you are. Let's look at chapter 49. I'm going to read the first 7 verses. The first 5 verses are this servant of the Lord speaking. And then verse 5 is the Lord responding to the servant. So let's begin. Chapter 49 of Isaiah says, listen to me, you islands. Hear this, you distant nations. Before I was born, the Lord called me. From my birth, he has made mention of my name. He made my mouth like a sharpened sword. In the shadow of his hand, he hid me. He made me into a polished arrow and concealed me in his quiver. He said to me, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will display my splendor. But I said, I have labored to no purpose. I have spent my strength in vain and for nothing. Yet what is due me is in the Lord's hand. My reward is with my God. And now the Lord says, he who formed me in the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him and gather Israel to him. For I am honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God has been my strength. He says, is it too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob, and to bring back those of Israel I have kept? I will make you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring my salvation to the ends of the earth. This servant back in the early part of those verses calls on the islands and the nations. And what does that mean? He's calling for the whole world, all the different kinds of peoples to listen. It's important that someone listen to him, like it is for you and I. We want people to listen to us. And why was it important that he listened? In verse 3, I think it gives us an explanation. He said, you ought to listen to me because I have the special calling. The Lord's called me for this specific purpose, for you to hear what I have to say, to be this servant of the Lord. What's the description of the servant? Hey, it says he's got a sharpened sword as a tongue, and a polished arrow as a tongue, as a mouth. And sometimes you think about raising our kids or dealing with people, sometimes somebody has to have what? A sharpened sword as a mouth. They've got to sort of cut through the conscience of other people to sort of get them in tune with what maybe you need them to do, or what they need to do to correct what's going wrong. But it says a sharpened sword. In other words, something needs to pierce into these people so they listen, so they understand. And then it says polished arrow. I did a little background study on that just briefly. It talked about when a warrior polished an arrow, it meant they were developing or designing or preparing that arrow for a special reason, a particular thing they wanted to do with it. And so this servant is saying, look, I've been treated as a polished arrow. I have a special purpose. But don't you think the Lord let us live this long, and He created us? He's really got a special purpose for us. Hey, it may not even be something we want to do, or that we want to endure, or that we want to face. But the Lord called this servant saying, I've got a special purpose for you. And if you think about it, this is the Messiah, the projection of the Messiah. What was His special purpose? To go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Just imagine. We think about Christ as Jesus walking through this life, and you think it was easy being Jesus? It was no easier for Him than it is for you and I to be who we are supposed to be. It was a tough call for Him. It wasn't like a walk through the park for Him. It was tough, but it was a special purpose He was called to do. He felt everything we felt, all the things that can make it seem so hard. But also in that verse, He said, the Lord hid me in the shadow of His hand, and He also concealed me in His quiver. In other words, the Lord gave me protection. And when it was time for my special arrow to come out, I was prepared. The Lord kept me for that until the time to use it. He was called for this special task. It didn't make it any easier to fulfill it. Sometimes we feel like the Lord's calling us to do something, but we can feel like verse 4 says. What did it say? It said, hey, but I said to myself, I have labored for no purpose. Have you ever just tried to get something done and it just seemed like, okay, what was the point of all that? Like, I've done all this, I've committed all of this, and I didn't get a reward for it. There's no reward for it. I didn't get what was due. And then He said, my attitude though is what? Whatever I'm due is in the Lord's hands. Sometimes the Lord calls us to do things that doesn't look like it's succeeded. But that's from our perspective. From the Lord's perspective, maybe we accomplished exactly what He wanted us to do. And that's what it's saying there. In verse 7, to give you an example, it says this. He said, listen, in 6, let's go back. It says, is it too small a thing for you to be my servant to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept? He said, okay, here's part of your mission, to bring the Israelites back to their land, to bring them back into the fold, to understand who Jesus really is, the Messiah. But He said, not only that, you may not realize it, but there's a bigger picture. What? It says in the latter part of that, to bring salvation to the ends of the earth, to everyone. Isn't that what happened to Jesus? He preached first. He said, I'm preaching to the Jews first. And that's what the disciples did. After Jesus left, they preached to the Jews first, and then they went to the Gentiles. They spread it out. So that was the great plan that the Lord had for them to speak. Even though rejected, it carried out through the whole world. God used Israel's difficult situations and circumstances to carry out His intent, even though it did not look like success. Examples of that, and we've talked about it in the past, has been, you think Joseph, the day he got sold by his brothers into slavery, he thought everything was going to work out really well? No. You think the Israelites in the really early church, when they were really being hammered by persecution, they thought it was going to turn out all right? But what did persecution do? It made them scatter. You can imagine, if it had gone really well for the disciples, they could have just hovered around Jerusalem and been this little sect, a little cult. just sort of looking after each other and like we're the only ones that really know kind of thing. The Lord said, no, that ain't the way that's going to happen. I'm going to lay some heavy stuff on you. You're going to scatter. You're going to get out of here and you're going to spread what you know. And that's exactly what happened. And sometimes what we think is trouble means what? That's exactly where the Lord wants us to go. Now let's look at verses 8 through 12. Here it'll talk about Israel in the sense where God's going to restore them, and this really is particularly focused about their return from Babylon and those kind of things, but it also points to the time that the Lord will reign. And let's begin with 8. He said, this is what the Lord says, in the time of my favor I will answer you. In the day of salvation I will help you. I will keep you and make you to be a covenant for the people, to restore the land, to reassign its desolate inheritances, to say to the captives, come out, to those in darkness, be free. They will feed beside the roads and find pasture in every barren hill. They will neither hunger or thirst, nor will the desert heat or the sun beat upon them. He who has compassion on them will guide them and lead them beside springs of water. It will turn my mountains into roads, and my highways will be raised up. See, they will come from afar, some from the north, some from the west, and some from the region of Aswan. The Lord said in verse 8, in the time of my favor I will answer you. In the day of salvation I will help you. This seems to be a reference. I don't know if you remember some of the Old Testament stuff. There was a year called the year of Jubilee. And in the year of Jubilee, if you had been forced to sell yourself into slavery, or you had to sell the inherited land that was given to you when they took the promised land, in the year of Jubilee, everything was wiped out. You got your land. Your family got your land back. If you had sold yourself into slavery, you were set free. So you just think about it, that he said, I'll restore the desolate inheritances. This is a reference to that where God just rechecks everything. And one commentator said it's sort of the way the Lord intended creation to be, that he had this plan, this order that was the ideal, and what happened? Man failed, and it created this desolate place that we live in a way. And the Lord said, one day there'll be a jubilee year, and everything's going to be set right. Everything will go back the way I intended it all to be, the order that it all ought to have. This ownership that God has, he would give it to us. Now, he said that I'll come out and set the benefits of it. I'll come and to those that are in darkness, I'll set them free. Now, all of these things, really, you don't want to take them as, I'm talking about feeding by the road and the mountains. It's not as much a physical thing as what? A spiritual thing. He's talking a spiritual plane here. And what kind of person is in the darkness? Think about all our world today. Who's in the darkness? I'm not talking about politics. You know, everybody's got their belief that the other side's in the darkness about a lot of things. But here, it's talking about spiritual darkness. I found this quote from a commentator. He said, when we're talking about people that are spiritually blind, and that's what that would be, he identified them as people where they do not have the ability to see the truth about God in their personal need for him. Think about those people, that just don't buy into God. Well, one of their premises is, I really don't need him. I don't need him. So I don't need to know about it. And in verses 10 through 12, it describes sort of in a spiritual sense the benefits of living out of the darkness to living in the light, that I'll have spiritual food, I'll have drink for my soul, I'll have protection from the heat. One commentator said, that's the heat of our temptations. I thought about what tempts us. And how does it feel like heat sometimes? Pretty interesting the way it was put. And it's also where it protects us from the opposition of the world. And he also said a benefit is when I do face the barren hills and these mountains, and listen, no matter how close you are to the Lord, guess what? He puts mountains in our way sometimes, doesn't he? Are we supposed to say, Lord, I just wish you'd make it go away? Sometimes he wants us to face the mountain. Sometimes he wants us to climb it. Sometimes he wants us to go around it. And one way to look at it is the Lord put it there for a reason. What am I going to learn from it? What's the purpose of what I'm facing? Why did he give me this? What is he asking me to do? What is he calling me to do? Verse 12 says, when others see our walk, I got the idea that when everyone else sees how I face my mountains in my life, they'll see my God. And then when they see us dealing with life and the stresses of life and the way the Lord would call us to go, it benefits everyone. He talks about where people will be converted from all different kinds of lands. In other words, Christians ought to be seen as being strong in the Lord, where it impacts people. Even if they're in the darkness, they're going to pay attention to something like that. Now look at 13. It says, shout for joy, O heavens, rejoice, O earth. Burst into song, O mountains, for the Lord comforts his people and will have compassion on his afflicted ones. Two things you see there. If he's comforting us, it means there is stress in our life. There are going to be things that are going to make us uncomfortable, that are going to be a struggle. He didn't say that because it would never happen. He said it will happen. You will have those times. And we're supposed to sing. And he said then also, I know you're going to face those things. You're going to be afflicted at times, but the Lord will have compassion. The Lord will give us compassion. It talked about earlier there where it said, Lord, there'll be a day where I save you, my salvation will work. And sometimes we just are waiting for the Lord to intervene in our lives. What I want you to see is that even though it doesn't look like it sometimes, the Lord's always going to be compassionate. He's always going to extend mercy to us, even if we don't see it. He intended to deliver Israel, and he did. He intends to deliver us one day. And he'll deliver anyone that's in captivity. Because it says in there that there's a day for salvation for everyone. And so there are going to be days that we don't think it's possible to do what we've got to do. But I think the Lord said, I'm going to be your comfort. So I want to close with a couple of verses. John 14:27 says this, and these are the words of Jesus. He said, peace I leave with you. Peace, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your heart be troubled, and do not live afraid. Don't live in fear. And Matthew 28 points to, I think a lot of times, the burdens we have, are they not self-imposed? We load ourselves up with burdens that we really did not ever have to carry. Listen to what Jesus said. He said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. He said, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. And I thought, isn't that amazing that he said, I'm not going to load you down. If you load it down, what did I do? I loaded my own pack animal. I put it on my own back many times. The Lord said, I'm going to make it easy for you. That's why he died on the cross. That's why he saved us. He brought us out of the light to do what? To make it easy for us. To have something more than the burden of the things that really can knock us down. Listen, y'all be blessed. Have a great week.